Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Growers & Co. One of the more exciting developments in recent years is that thanks to Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, and his team, there is now a clothing, tool, and apparel company that was built for exactly the type of work we talk about on this show. I know that I have personally grown tired of looking through workwear websites and catalogs built for fishing or carpentry to find what I need for market gardening, so I was thrilled when Growers & Co. came to fruition, and even more thrilled when I tried their clothing. They have done absolutely excellent work. Their clothing is well made and well fitted. The tools are designed by growers and made to last. There is also a magazine, a really excellent magazine that Growers & Co. is putting out twice per year with a focus on small-scale farming, but also that represents the dignity, skills, and creativity required to do this work. I love the clothes. I rock the Muscovich vest a lot, the shirts and hats, all of it. Anyway, follow Growers & Co. on Instagram and all the platforms and check out what they have to offer at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you by BCS America.
BCS two-wheel tractors power dozens of professional quality, PTO-driven attachments for soil working, mowing, property maintenance, snow removal, and more. BCS tractors are famous for their durability and versatility, with handlebars that rotate 180 degrees for front and rear mount implements. And now, BCS has introduced a game changer in the two-wheel tractor world, Model 770 with hydrostatic drive. Model 770's easy grip lever enables the operator to precisely select ground speed and direction of travel without the need to shift or vary the throttle. This is extremely useful for heavy mowing or snow clearing jobs, where constant changes in direction or speed are necessary. Now you can keep the flail mower running at full RPM while you mow forward, reverse, and forward again, all without the need to shift or re-engage the PTO. The hydrostatic Model 770 is on sale now. Check out bcsamerica.com for sale pricing and to find your nearest dealer. That's bcsamerica.com.
Huge thanks to our show sponsors. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 21, season 3. Got a great and kind of different podcast for you all this week. I've been wanting to explore the idea of small grains for small farms on the podcast, so I called up someone who does precisely that and whose work I've been admiring for the past couple of years, Nazirahk Amen of Purple Mountain Organics. He goes by at Dr. Farmer Brother on Instagram. He's located outside Washington, D.C. In fact, Nazirahk actually farms in several different locations in that area where he does a heavy focus on small-scale grains and earns some pretty amazing numbers from it. So in this episode, we talk almost exclusively about dryland rice. We get into some of the equipment used for small grains, like small Japanese combines, which he imports through his company Purple Tools. We talk about his cover crops and just so much more. I was blown away by this conversation, and I'm really not sorry for how many small grain producers it may birth. Before we get going, please don't forget to pre-order a copy of my forthcoming book, The Living Soil Handbook. It ships in July, but by pre-ordering it now, specifically from no-tillgrowers.com, the proceeds from that go to making more content. That's more podcasts, more videos, whatever we can do to bring value to this space. And we already have some great content coming for you. If you do not live in the States, however, the shipping is really high, so just support your local bookstore and pre-order it from them. Anyway, otherwise, check that out at no-tillgrowers.com. Also, if you just want to support our work, you can do so with cryptocurrencies, in fact, or just regular currencies at no-tillgrowers.com/support. All right. Enough for me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Nazirahk Amen of Purple Mountain Organics. Nazirahk Amen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Super excited to have you on today. So, we haven't really broached the subject of like small scale grains and stuff like that on the podcast yet. And I think there's so much potential there. I'm also excited about like how you weave that with your sort of medicine work. But like we do on this podcast, let's start where we always start. Where are you located? What kind of acreage are you working on and those sorts of things?
So I'm in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is inside the DC Beltway, and our farming right now is about 20 acres. I guess and we lease land around the DC Beltway. So right now we're leasing land in 3 different locations. And we also work with a university to help them sort of keep up the farm at the university. That's the University of DC causes. So the University of DC is a land-grant university. It's the only land-grant university in the U.S. that is, I guess, urban. And so they have a farm in Beltsville, Maryland. And since 2011, we've sort of been there. And so basically working at that farm has allowed us to sort of amass a lot of farm equipment that we use. Our operation is mobile, so I have a truck and a trailer, and all of our equipment is compact. I use a Antonio Carrero, it's a 90 horsepower tractor that I could put on this trailer and all around with a bunch of equipment. And so that's how we get a lot of the farm work done.
Wow. So do you have like a central location where all that equipment kind of lives?
Yes. Yes and no. At this point, we keep most of it at the university. And then, I have farm equipment sitting on probably 2 or 3 other farms where farmers just let me store stuff where they have extra space. So that's kind of how we've been rolling. So we've been looking for farmland, and we've been looking for a farm. And so the balance between successful farming and, my medical practice has not been there. So we are very hesitant to leave, the thing that feeds us the most. So right now we kind of have our feet in the city, and, we do this sort of mobile farming thing. And we're looking for a more centralized location where we can, ideally it would be about 30 acres, and we could do a nice crop rotation and with our small grains and cover cropping and maybe a bit of a vegetable operation. But at this point, I think our niche is in the markets here is grains and beans. So we do the Tacoma Park Farmers Market and the famous DuPont Circle Farmers Market in D.C. We do the winter market there with just beans and grains.
Wow. And then are you doing any other, are you doing any sort of CSA or anything like that? Is it almost exclusively farmers market?
We do farmers markets, and then lately, since COVID has come on, we are probably doing add-ons for it's probably at least 4 or 5 different local CSAs.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So they're kind of buying in your product and then redistributing it.
Yes, and then we also have before COVID hit, we were really doing a lot with local chefs. So here we have a few restaurants. There's the Woodbury restaurant in Baltimore, and we have a local bakery here. These are businesses that basically source 100% locally, and so they're committed to helping local farmers produce, sustainably. So Seilu is still one of our big customers. They're able to still do their bread business now. And then we have a couple other bakers up in Baltimore who use our products. So I think their business is going to be greater once this COVID crisis sort of ends.
Yeah, it's been tough on restaurants and bakeries, etc.
Yeah.
So give us a little bit of your own history, because you mentioned this other practice that you have that's kind of the main breadwinner at the moment. Can you talk about what that is and how farming came into the picture?
Well, I grew up in rural Louisiana, so farming has sort of always been in the picture. It's one of those classic stories where, as a kid, we actually we lived in this small city, and my father's family owned land out in the country, and my first memories are like pulling nails out of old cypress lumber so that we could build a house on my father's on our land in the country. And so when I was about 10 or 11, no, I was 12, we moved out to the country. And so we weren't necessarily farmers, but we lived off of the land, which meant we kept like probably a quarter-acre garden. We canned everything that we grew, and we kept pigs, we kept cows, and we hunted. So I understood what it meant to sort of live off the land because it was what we did. And so I ended up, of course, the African American. So the whole idea is like, get your education, get out of here. Farming is not a life you want to live. Like, people have worked hard to get away from this. So I ended up going to New Orleans to do pre-med. I worked as an EMT intermediate level, so as a medic in the city of New Orleans during the late 80s, and so that completely changed my life in terms of, like, I thought I was going to want it to be a regular medical doctor, and I just saw the healthcare system for what it was, and looked at what I was doing in a very reactionary light. And I also looked at how I literally watched the community be destroyed by drugs and was part of that whole thing. And so for me to sort of rebuild, I sort of joined this spiritual community for a few years and kind of had a time out. And during that time was sort of changed my diet, changed my lifestyle, develop more of a holistic perspective, and so by the time 1992 came, I believe, I actually moved back. 1993, I moved back to the land where my parents lived and made a go at organic farming for about a year and a half while I actually finished up my undergrad. And so, of course, even then, my parents were like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, you have a college degree and you want to farm. And so, the interesting thing is the farm bug, once you get it, and of course I grew up knowing, like, being around a farm, but as a kid, like, the idea of leaving the baseball field or the football field to go out to the land to, go work some vegetables was like the worst thing ever. But once I adopted it as a lifestyle, once I really got into farming, I mean, it took over like a bug. It just took over my whole being. So wherever I've been since 1993, I've completely farmed up my neighborhoods. And, when I went to this school called Fortier, which is a 4-year naturopathic medical school. And I did a degree in naturopathic medicine and a degree in acupuncture. And so while I was there, I kind of farmed up the neighborhood I lived in. And then I moved, after I graduated, I moved here to D.C. I had an opportunity to work in a practice with a doc who had been really successful. And so within a year, I had a full-time practice built up. And so as part of what we do as naturopathic doctors, we help people change their lifestyle, because we look at diet and nutrition as one of the biggest obstacles to cure. So when people come in, we put them on detox diets, and so most of this, like, basically it's tricking people into eating whole foods and teaching people about organics and free range and, how to eat healthier. I've been a vegan for over 30 years, and so I use a plant-based diet. I don't necessarily think a plant-based diet is great for everyone, but it's been the diet that sort of worked for me. And so even as part of my family's what we've done is we've always strived to grow the food to sustain ourselves. So we always had this goal to like grow most of the food that we eat. In our medical practice, we would hold these cooking classes. And so at one point, my practice actually moved into our house and for a minute between when I was transitioning. So we would have people come over and do the cooking classes, and the cooking classes were hands-on. So we'd have folks go out into the yard, pick the food, and then we'd have them come into the house and prepare the food. So a lot of folks had just never, seen a carrot in the ground or seen broccoli grow or picked a tomato fresh. And, so that's kind of how we got this reputation as sort of urban farmers. And that was back in the early 2000s. So, and at the same time, it's funny because I've always had this idea of having an accessory income so I didn't have to see patients all the time. Because in the first practice I worked in, I got to the point where, I was able to see like 60, 70 patients a week if I wanted to. And it was just a lot. And so I always wanted to have like something else. And I found farming to be something that was really grounding. So in about 2004, I ended up buying, I was at a medical conference up in Brattleboro, Vermont, and I stopped in this little hardware store and I bought a bunch of DeWitt tools, and I found them to be pretty amazing. And so I ended up finding out how I could become a wholesaler for DeWitt. And so that's how Purple Mountain Organics got started, because we ended up buying a bunch of farm tools, and I was trying to we started off, what else were we doing at the time? We were doing like a seed business. So we were starter plant business locally. We did starter plants, and then I had all these tools. And so probably around 2006, I met Joel from Earth Tools. And I kind of, I was looking at I bought a used walk-behind tractor. And I was talking to Joel, and I told him what we were up to. And so he was like, man, if you got those tools, you're not going to sell them to just backyard farmers. Those tools need to go to farmers. And so he mentioned a couple of farm conferences that Earth Tools couldn't get to, and he suggested that we go. And so that's how we started Purple Mountain Organics. Was Virginia Association of Biological Farmers was the first farm conference that we did. And then we became like regional, basically tools and organic farm supply business got started that way. And then I had to move my medical practice. And so we didn't have our same farm in our yard. We moved to a smaller yard. Like now I live on the main street. I have a big house, but we don't have any yards. So we got into the community gardens. And so from the community gardens, I had this walk-behind tractor, and, I would go in and do, like, multiple gardeners' plots. And so Bread for the City, which is a D.C. food pantry, came to us and asked if we would help them with this orchard project, which was a 2-acre orchard out at the University of D.C.'s, out at their farm in Beltsville. So that's how we... so we did the orchard, and from that, the university saw our work, and they asked us to start helping them. And so we were able to start off, I think the first project we did for them was 2 acres of vegetables, and then we had the 2-acre garden project. And so it's just evolved from there. We ended up I was at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Conference in Durham one year, and I saw one of the presenters had a rice project that they were doing, and on the second year of their project, they were doing the sort of Japanese Fukuoka style sort of rice, mimicking his style of the one straw farm revolution type farming. And so in the second year of their project, there was a drought, and they had to use irrigation on their rice. And he noticed that rice that he irrigated actually had a better yield than the rice that was that they had done paddy style. So I was like, you know what, I can do this. So we wrote a grant, which was initially a SARE grant, and that SARE grant, SARE actually did not pick up our grant, but the USDA looked at the grant, and actually SARE did pick it up, but they dropped it because they didn't understand our budget. And the SARE grant was only for $15,000, and then the USDA someone there looked at it, and we ended up getting a $75,000 3-year grant to do research on developing a methodology for growing rice using Dryland methods in the Mid-Atlantic. So that's how we got into the grain business, because once you start with any grain, you have the issue of harvesting the grain, which you need like a threshing machine for. And then you also have the issue of drying the grain. So you have to come up with some type of drying facility. But once you have those two mechanisms, then you can pretty much grow any grain. So we started off with rice production, and from the rice production, we were able to sort of expand into, we do heirloom varieties of wheat, we do rye, we do barleys, we do buckwheat is one of the crops. We've done mustard in the past. And then from there, we've kind of gotten off into beans. So because we have a combine, and once you get a combine, you can, harvest pretty much anything. We have an all-purpose combine, so now we can, dry beans are one of the things that we do. And so we've built up this sort of market for local grains and local beans. And so that's so the way my life looks is, right now in the wintertime, I'm running a medical practice like 4 days a week. Once the spring comes, we'll cut that back to more like 2.5 days a week. And then I farm the rest of the time. And then, the farming picks up really well here, probably come, when we're looking into March, we're going to put in, I'm planning on doing about 8 acres of oats. And then we're building our barley market. We're not really into the brewing type market. We're really into having people, use food for sustenance. So we're really trying to, we haven't worked out our food niche for barley yet. Folk are not excited about barley. So we're going to grow some new Ethiopian varieties of barley that we found that should work out well. And probably put in, this year was an interesting year because it rained right through the fall. So a lot of farmers weren't able to get in any type of fall cover crops. So it's going to be more of a spring wheat year than ever, because people just weren't able to get into the field to get in winter wheat varieties. So we're going to do some of that. And then, we go into the summer, and once we get into the summer, we start with our beans.
Can you talk, okay, so there's so many good things in there, but I'd love to hear kind of a rundown of how the Dryland rice works. Can you kind of take us from start to finish on that?
So our Dryland rice production started, basically, I was like, we should be able to use just regular farm equipment that we have. So at the time, we were doing this thing with the university where, so we can, what we did for the university. So we were contracted by Bread for the City, which is a food pantry. And Bread for the City amazingly had these large groups of volunteers that could come out and harvest anything. So we were able to lay out these 2-acre plots using At the time it was BioTello. BioTello is now Bio 360, but the biodegradable plastic, and then we were using landscape fabric in between. And so we would lay out these, 2-acre plots where it was basically turnkey, in that all we had the irrigations on timers, and so it was a plot where we didn't have to do much. We could go through there maybe once or twice with the volunteer groups. They would do all the small weeding, and so it was really they had to harvest, And so I was like, we could do the same thing with rice. So we started off with, I have the Carrero tractor. I use a spader, and basically we sort of put down our amendments. We use a spader to prepare the soil. That was our main sort of implement that we used a lot, the spader, and then we come behind with a standard, like I have a rain flow plastic layer, and we would use the biodegradable plastic and then use that like 3 or 4 foot landscape fabric in between. So like I said, we could lay out a whole field and not have a weed come up in that field. And so that way I could just go in, do the work, and then, do the maintenance work. And, our contracts with the food pantries worked out that way. And so we didn't have, that way my operation, which was only 2 or 3 people, could, grow that much food, because we didn't have to, on the back end, we didn't have to come in and market or, pick any of the food. So we were able to do that scale of vegetables at the same time that we were sort of managing this orchard. So the grain project was simply to lay out an acre on the same format of using the biodegradable plastic. And so we looked at the IRRI, SRRI, the system of rice intensification, where what they found. So this is a project in Asia and Africa where they're trying to, the issue with rice production is that rice produces more methane than, beef and cattle lots. So it is the most methane producing endeavor, I guess, that we do when you have rice sitting in flooded paddies, because the paddies are just, it's an anaerobic process. Rice is a crop that is actually able to breathe, through the leaves, so they don't need to have oxygen down on the root system. So they could sit in water and basically extract all the nutrients that they need to get from the top 5 millimeters of soil under that water. And then to understand that when you have an anaerobic process like that, when you flood a field, you take oxygen out, which reduces it, and then all of your phosphorus and your potassium become available, so that the only issue that you have to worry about in rice paddy production is the mobilization of your nitrogen, right? So in general, dryland rice production, because of that mobilization, because of the fixation of phosphorus and potassium, you get these great yields. Like paddy production yields are about 8,000 pounds per acre. So dryland production yields are about half of that, because you just can't get the phosphorus and the potassium in the same way that you can get it in the paddy production. So that said, what we did was, we did this project, and, our issue, so in with the system of rice intensification, what they found was they could reduce the amount of flooding and the time that the water was in the field, but they had to start with this sort of a premise of spacing. So the whole idea is that if you space rice at about 25 centimeters, which is about 10, maybe it's about 11 inches, I believe. So, and you do this grid that you could help these plants with their tillering. And so if you get maximum tillering off of the plants, then you create much healthier plants. And then when you have those healthier plants, you don't need to have it flooded as long, and you can get better production. So instead of these production systems like, the old way of doing paddy rice here in the States is that we take you're basically air seeding. They would seed rice paddies from the air, and with using like 100 to 150 pounds of rice per acre. We're growing rice when we do an acre of rice, we probably use about 2 pounds of rice for seed because we're basically starting the rice. So the other part of SRI is that you're doing rice transplants instead of direct seeding. So when you do the rice transplants, the system depends on transplanting the rice so you do the rice transplants, and then we're trying to basically get them out right before the plants go into their tillering phase. So at about day 20 or 21, we try to get the rice out, the plants out into the field so that they could start their tillering after transplantation. So here, the other variable in play is like your growing season. Rice tends to be like 120, 140 days, some of the varieties. So you want to, we're basically starting plants indoors in April for, as a May 15th transplanting out into the field. So we're trying to get maximum tillering and then promote the growth of that plant. So rice plants, basically, we break it down. So if you say like 120 days is the average cycle. So you have a vegetative growth phase. So you have root growth. We're looking for plant height. We're looking at tillering during that period. But it's, so in the vegetative growth is when, there's a lot of things happening there. But during the vegetative stage of growth for rice, the plants can actually withstand a drought and not have affect the yield. So you don't have to have those fields flooded during this period. Whereas traditionally they would just immediately within, the first few weeks, they would sort of flood the paddies, which created this big methane production area as well. And so right now SRI is trying to use less water during this vegetative phase. And once you get about 10 days before the reproductive phase, you want to have, basically, they would flood the fields then. So what we do is just saturate the field. So we're growing on a 30-inch bed. We're spacing our plants at 10 inches apart. We used to use the water wheel, but now we just use the Too Bad Cat's wheel with a small dibble on it because even with rice plants, we're planting only one transplant in each hole, and we're depending on the tillering, tillering means that the plant is putting out these side shoots, and all those side shoots will create a panicle. So instead of each plant having 5 or 6 heads on the top, that creates a sort of a spikelet of rice, you have more like 20 or 30 on each plant. And so you get maximum production for each plant. And so as long as the field is saturated about 10 days before that whole reproductive phase, and then we keep it saturated through the reproductive phase into basically, so the panicle goes up the stem, and then you sort of get your spikelet with all your little rice pods there. And so and then the plants go through this milk phase, and then so we keep the field saturated through the milk phase, and then you go into a dry down phase. And so what we noticed is that we could do this, and we not only got regular dryland rice production is about half the yield of paddy production, and we were able to get more like 2/3 of the yield of paddy production on some of the varieties that we were growing. So all we are doing is using, so we do those 3 rows apart, 10-inch spacing on our rows, and we have 2 lines of drip tape going down the row. And so, we maintain we had another farmer here, one of my buddies, and he was growing rice a few years before us, and he was just kind of like growing rice like it was another vegetable. And so what he didn't understand was that crucial phase before, his average before we came on board was around 1,500 pounds of rice per acre, and he just thought that's the way it had to be. And then he had huge issues with a disease called rice blast, which can affect the plants because when they go through a drought. And so we were able, through that trip that I took down to LSU, I was able to basically, just from that simple walk through the field with this professor, I was able to sort of understand what I needed to understand to come back and do like the Dryland rice project successfully. Once I understand when the plants needed to have the water that was crucial, we were able to like automatically bring his 1,500 pounds up to over 3,000 pounds per acre. And then playing with some variety. So that USDA, we went back to SARE. SARE was able we rewrote the grant for SARE, and SARE gave us, we got the grant that we initially wrote to SARE, or at least the funds to do a rice variety trial. And so from that, the grant that we got from SARE, in addition to the USDA grant, we were able to find varieties that could produce almost, we got one of them produced up to 5,500 pounds per acre, but we have a few that produce more like 5,000 pounds per acre. So now we grow about 5 or 6 different varieties of rice, and we do it only on 1 acre, which means we're growing like a quarter acre of pretty much each variety. People love variety, so we have short grain, we have medium grain, and we have long grain varieties of rice that we can grow. And we do black rice, we do Dinarato, which is like a red rice variety, and we do a number of Koshiakari, which is a Japanese variety, is one of our big sellers. It's a beautiful sushi rice. So then we have to balance out between taste and quantity. And so most of the varieties that we grow for taste, those are yielding more like 3,000 to 3,500 pounds per acre. We found one variety of the higher yielding varieties that we really like, that folks really like. And we've just been able to like do research on rice to actually, so even with rice, because of the paddy conditions, right? The varieties of rice that are bred for paddies, because in a paddy situation, the rice plant literally doesn't really have to grow any root system because it's getting all of the nutrition it needs from the first 5 millimeters of soil, right? So, but when you get into dryland varieties, which has mainly been grown in the hills of Asia, so in Asia they grow, it's one of their primary crops, and they're growing rice in the mountains as well as in these paddy situations. So they've done some rice breeding for dryland situations, and these plants tend to take up a lot more. They have a much more extensive root system than rice varieties which are grown for the paddy. So the other place that does a lot of dryland rice production, but for all the wrong reasons, is Brazil. In Brazil, they do dryland rice production, but they're doing it after they come in and like clear cut the rainforest. The soil is usually very acidic, and they can't get in like they can't start their grazing grasses. So what they do is rice can tolerate pH down to like 4. So they come in first with a rice crop, and then after they grow the rice crop, they'll come in with their grasses. But they get in that rice crop. So Brazil they do a lot with dryland rice production because of that, the method that they're using down there. So from that, we've been able to find rice from Brazil. We have rice from, all of Asia. And we've been working with the USDA. There's a beautiful lady named Anna McClung at the USDA Rice Research Center in Arkansas, and she's helped us find varieties of rice that work well for our region.
That's so cool. Okay, so I have some questions about One, just on a technical note, when you're talking pounds per acre, are you talking cleaned and ready for market, or is that just at harvest?
That's at harvest. So you have to look at, usually you're going to lose about 20 to 30% in the hulling process. And so when rice is coming out of the field, normally we're trying to get it out of the field at about below 20% moisture. And so you have to look at weight depending on your moisture. Like if you harvest rice in a wet time when there's a high moisture, obviously you're going to lose a lot just coming out of the field. So in order to stabilize it, we put it in dryers. Any grain that comes out of the field, you want to get it down to 12, 13, 14%. In order for it to be stable enough to be able to store. So ideally, it's coming out of the field somewhere around 18% for the rice, and then we dry it down to, like 12 or 13%. And so in that process, you're going to lose maybe 10% of the weight right there. And then, depending on the variety, when you hull it, you're going to lose another 20%.
Okay, so take us through what harvester are you using, and then what does the cleaning process look like? And then maybe lead us into what the profitability is there.
So when we first started this, right? So we were kind of foolish in the sense of, we thought we could go out there. We planted an acre of rice. And then, I was like, we're going to just use hand sickles and hand harvest this whole crop. And, in the beginning, I was looking for just a threshing unit. And so what we found was that, we really, not only in the realm of, cultivation tools, America has basically divested from small grains for, the last, 50 or 60 years. So the only people who have any kind of small grain technology probably are the Amish or maybe some Mennonites, where you have communities that are trying to be sustainable, and like bread is a big part of their thing. But so the small grain processing equipment is really only found in university research centers. And even then, it's not really geared towards production. So there, in the university research centers, their whole thing is and the difference between LSU and their rice research versus Anna McClung and her rice research, LSU is really about quantity. So they're doing research to for this big matching yield and becoming the biggest, baddest producers around the globe. So it's all about just quantity, grow more rice for folk. And so whereas Anna McClung, she is in charge of the grin, which is basically she is in charge of maintaining the grin is like the seed storage bank. So she is in charge of maintaining the genetics for rice. So they have rice in there from all around the world. So her focus is quality versus quantity is what I'm trying to say. So when we looked at, equipment at I went to LSU, they showed me what they were using. I went to Anna McClung. So you get into the harvesting, and they are hand scale threshers that you can use that were available. But we ended up buying a used Massey Ferguson 8, which was a used research combine. And this thing was it was only 8 foot wide, but it was, I think, 14 foot tall.
Wow.
It was this huge, short combine that when you got in it was a pretty scary sort of ride, because it was, if you let off the hydrostatic transmission, the whole thing would just tilt forward. And so it was an interesting ride. So that was my first, and even the way I got there was I was looking at used research equipment. And one of the people at one of these places that hold this used research equipment, he called me back and he was like, "Hey man, I don't have a thresher, but I got this, this combine that I think will do just right for you." And so he sold it to me, and we got it delivered to us, and And we started off with that. And the Massey Ferguson 8 is sort of an all-purpose combine. Like, it would do rice, but it would also do mustard, so we could do all kinds of, it didn't do beans well, but it would do the rice well and other grains. Beans, it didn't do well because it had a long chute on it, and it used air, and it would basically, it would break up the beans because it was just so forceful. And so we'd harvest our field of beans, but half of them were already like broken in half. So we didn't recommend that. So I got off into, so from that, we started looking at who in the world actually still had small scale grain growing operations that served the local level. And so I immediately, India was one, and then I looked at the Japanese equipment. And so I started getting into importing used Japanese farm equipment. So I started off with a Seki combine, and that's a small Japanese combine that does 4 rows of rice at once. And that combine was good for rice, and it was good for wheat and harvesting. And that way, and then once we got into the beans, we needed a sort of a different combine. So I have 2 different combines, and they're both have a 5-foot header on them, so it's only good for harvesting 5 foot wide. And they both have bins in it that hold about 1,000 pounds each of grain, probably more like 1,500 on the bean combine. It's got a little bit bigger, but the header's only 5 foot wide, and they act just like the big combines. They're a lot easier to use. The Japanese combines, the threshing mechanisms are really efficient. With the Massey Ferguson, it was this whole thing of adjusting concaves and getting all the measurements right. There were times, like when we had to calibrate the combine, and we'd lose a quarter of our grain just from trying to calibrate the combine. With the Japanese equipment, you go through the field, and you can almost be assured that everything that was in the field is in your tank. That's how efficient they are. So we got off into Japanese farm equipment, importing the Japanese farm equipment with the combines. And then I started looking at how the Japanese, do other things with their farm equipment. And we've been importing other sort of, like I mentioned earlier, we, like precision mechanical cultivation tools as well. So we've been looking at how we can just get more efficient with our whole process.
So you're distributing those as well, or is that you're just bringing them in for your own use? Like you're selling those through Purple Tools, right?
Yeah. So we've sold to universities rice hulling equipment. So all of the rice hulling equipment we sold to universities. I've sold a bunch of processing equipment to another farmer or a mill down in South Carolina. I've sold combines to other farmers. There's a farmer up here we sold the combine to that we imported, and then another farmer down in South Carolina that we sold the combines to. Down in South Carolina, you have the revival of the Carolina Gold and some of the rice plantations down there that went out of business once Louisiana and Arkansas came online. And it was simple, those plantations they're all, it's a, speaking of a soilless operation, those plantations are all peat. And so you can't get heavy equipment in there. So the only reason I was able to sell a combine down there is because they needed lightweight equipment that they could get in their levee system and use on those fields of peat that they have down there and harvest. So the revival of the Carolina Gold, that's what that's part of.
Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to get a word from our sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes NOP-compliant living potting soils in Cleveland, Ohio with food scraps they haul and compost themselves. Each batch of soil is tested against the competitors and the results are in. Plants vote for Tilth Soil. To learn more about their full line of products, please visit www.tilthsoil.com. The show is also brought to you by you, the patrons. Did you know we have almost 600 patrons at patreon.com/no-till-growers? That is incredible. And it is also so vital to our work. You are the absolute best. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you love this show, or No Till Flowers podcast, or Growers Live, or the Winter Growers podcast that we just released, or our videos, or anything else we do, and you want to support it, go to patreon.com/no-till-growers and consider signing up. And at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, Scott Snodgrass, and Jean-Martin Fortier. Big thanks to all of our show supporters. All right, back to Nazirahk. Okay, so take us into marketing.
So I have a buddy, Heinz, and I recommend his name is Heinz Thomas of Next Step Produce. He is really, I guess if I had a mentor or a big brother in all this, it's his facility that has really allowed us to do what we do. Because he has an 80-acre farm. He paid off his farm with vegetable production at the DuPont Circle Market. And then he ended up sort of getting, vegetable production wore him out. He's a little bit older than I am. And so he basically started to gear his operations towards grain production. And so he was the one who introduced us to grain production in terms of, basically setting the market. So when you talk about marketing, when I came online, he already had the sales for us. So he had the restaurants and he had the pricing. He figured out he has seed cleaners, he has gravity tables, he has laser color separators. He has basically all of the toys that you need to get grain from the field to the table in the ideal farm. I mean, in the highest quality that you can, he has it. I don't think you need all of that. I think you can get away with it with just simple seed cleaners and, drying equipment that we sort of made up over time. But, he has the more advanced stuff. So we've been able to, even for us, we've had equipment that we buy in. Like we bought in a really beautiful Japanese dryer that we keep down there. So our process is to harvest from the field, goes into the combine. From the combine, we put it in these super sacks. And once we put it in the super sacks, we haul it down to Heinz's. Once it gets down to Heinz, or Next Step, we'll run it through the seed cleaner. And then we put it in a dryer. Once it's dried, we'll probably go back through the seed cleaner again, do the gravity table, and do a deeper cleaning depending on what the grain is. And then we store it in bags, pretty much put everything in 50 or 60-pound bags, and then we keep it refrigerated at about 50 to 60 degrees with low moisture. So you want to keep everything with the lowest moisture. You don't have to refrigerate it. We know farmers who basically keep their grain in either super sacks that they sort of seal, or they don't necessarily use refrigerated spaces for that. But we have the advantage of being able to refrigerate our grains until we're ready to go to market. So our whole spiel on the grains at market is that these grains are grown locally and they're fresh. So a grain like rice, most people buy rice out of the supermarket. It might have been hauled 6 months ago. It might have been hauled 2 years ago. But once you haul rice, the nutritional value goes down. They say rice, 3 months after its harvest, the nutritional value is about half of what it was when you actually hauled it. So the nutritional value goes down immediately once you start hulling things and, taking the shell off. So with rice, people, we haul everything fresh before the market, and people can taste the difference. So when people buy our rice, so the pricing that Heinz came up for the rice is at about Well, we do retail. I think we're at $10 a pound. In the past, we've been higher when our production was less. We were able to come down because we were able to increase our production and have some better methods. So we're at $10 a pound, and the restaurants don't mind. The folks who come, we have loyal customers that come and buy it, and people can really taste the difference in the grains when you provide them fresh grains. And the same with the oats. So we do oats. We do a hulless variety of oats called streaker, which means that they're raw. So we harvest them from the field, we dry them down, and then the next step is just to roll them, and they're ready for market. And so we roll right before market, and people can taste the difference between the sort of, people call it cardboard versus real oats, because there's a big flavor difference with the oats. But I think some of the difference with the streaker is that, over the years, we've had this sort of, everybody's got high cholesterol and you need less fat. And so we've bred all these varieties of oats and grains that have less fat, but when you take the fat out, you also take the flavor out. So streaker happens to be a variety of oats that are pretty high in fat. So it's a much more flavorful variety of oats. So when people taste that, they don't understand, like the butter's already in it, like it's in the grain already. And so it's a beautiful experience, when people come back and they're like, hey man, we've never had oats that taste anything like this before. This is wonderful.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Kind of a rough back in the napkin kind of calculation. You're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 an acre on that rice, somewhere in that range on average.
On our rice. So on our rice, we're doing. We hope more to gross more like 40 or 50 off of our acre of rice. But
okay.
Yeah, if you want to say to actually like how much we sort of make on it, yeah, it's close to 20 or 30.
Okay, that's great.
Because,
that's like what you're netting, 20 or 30.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good, for any single crop, 20, when you're looking at like, what, $800 for an acre of corn, you're looking at $20,000 or $30,000 for an acre of netting $20,000 or $30,000 on an acre of rice. Like that's a huge difference. I'm surprised more people aren't looking into those things.
Well, I think it's having the infrastructure available makes a huge difference. So, I think the hulling on the rice is a big obstacle, but you can get a huller for, less than $5,000, and it's a one-time investment, and, you may have to do some upkeep, but, it's a machine, and, you can get it for less if you buy used. So, the huller that we work with a couple different hullers. We have, I think, 3 or 4 that we have access to right now. We brought in different ones. But most people want just straight brown rice. So, we have a way that we can like mill things down to white rice, with a widener, but, I really promote the whole grain effect. So one of the other things that we also are able to market the rice on is that most of the rice in the U.S., because old school rice production is this paddy-based production, a lot of it is done in these fields where back in the day they used fungicides that were laden with, either lead or cadmium, and arsenic. So that's the other one. So rice is one of those plants that will pick up heavy metals. And so like the rice production that we're doing using these Dryland methods, and, our focus in growing is basically on the biology of growing and not so much the chemistry of growing. Like we want to make sure the chemistry is there, but we definitely make sure the biology is there. And I think when you do that, then we can sort of offset the heavy metal uptake of the plants. And so we're able to grow rice that doesn't have, arsenic or doesn't have cadmium in it, so people can appreciate the fact that they're eating brown rice that is is heavy metal free. So that's another, if you're doing it on your farm, if you're on farmland where it's old, around here, I think the old tobacco farmland is probably going to be laden with heavy metals. We've been able to had been privileged to not, have any of that type farmland that we've been growing on, so we haven't had the issue of heavy metal uptake in our rice.
You mentioned the biology. Are you doing anything? Are you adding biology? Are there compost teas and that sort of stuff that you're spreading?
Yes. So we've been in the compost tea. I mean, we knew Elaine Ingram 15 years ago, maybe. We were kind of studying with her with the compost tea. One of the farms that we worked on at one point was more of a composting operation. And so the sort of missing the practical aspect of farming, but looking more at the biology. And so I think there's definitely some feet on the ground type issues when you look at biological farming, meaning a lot of it wasn't really practical in terms of thinking that having just biology is going to make your plants grow, but it definitely does make your plants a lot healthier. So our focus has definitely been on having the biology there, and even in terms of, pest control and nutrient uptake to, try to make sure that the microbes are there that are necessary to help the plants to get the nutrients that they need. So we've done, over the years, I mean, India is kind of ahead on this because they have had like nitrogen fixers and potassium fixers and phosphorus fixers. So we use microbial mixes that have these sort of agents in it that help the plants, the leaves sort of fix nitrogen, and the root system fix nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. So the whole issue of like with rice in the production that we mentioned is like, if you have all the phosphorus and potassium there in these sort of anaerobic conditions, how do you get that phosphorus and potassium there in regular conditions? And so the answer is to make sure you have all your microbes there. And so we use stuff, I think one of the products we use is called Microbe Remedy. But, basically these products have nitrogen fixers and potassium fixers there, along with the mycorrhiza. And so to try to, basically inundate our plants with these microbes from the beginning to ensure that they're as healthy as that they can be and get off to a good start. And, those agents are there on the plant, and we kind of reinforce it with a couple sprays during the season. But we inoculate our plants before we, put them out in the field with microbial.
Okay, so I do want to touch on real quick cover cropping. We talked about it before we started recording. Can you talk about some of your cover cropping approaches? And
right. So one of the things with us is, we're really trying to get away from plastics. I have struggled with, even organic certification and, the research that we did with the Bio 360 that sort of prevented us from being certified organic. And, of course, it's still up in the air how this stuff breaks down, how much petroleum products are in there. But in the last couple of years, it's come out that even in, regular vegetable production, one of the articles we found was an article about how the microplastics are affecting, farming in a couple of ways. One is the earthworm. So what they found is that microplastics break down and the earthworms are eating them, and they're basically doing the same thing to the earthworms that they're doing to the fish and the whales out in the ocean. They're filling up their digestive systems with microplastics, and then they can't do their job of filtering out, through the soil. And so basically the earthworms are starving because we're filling their guts up with microplastics. So that's one way it's affecting it on the farm. And the other way it's being affected is that the plants are directly able to pick up these microplastics. And it's almost like they just gobble them right up. So we need to start looking at, like, in organic farming, like, how is our use of plastics in organic farming affecting, the food that we're producing? And so I don't think many people are really looking at, like, studying how much plastics are in their food, but I think we need to start. So that said, we have moved over towards more mechanical cultivation and then more sort of low-till and no-till situations. So for us, cover cropping, especially in our, like, rotation of, like, grains and beans and things like that, it's all about timing. So there's two methods. I know there was a book that was put out on organic no-till, and a lot of it was based on smaller farms and using this sort of way of using the silage tarp to cover your ground and giving you sort of a fresh start where you can be ahead of the weeds and things like that. But when we get into, like, using, an acre is usually the smallest plot that we're working with. And so there's no way we can cover that much with silage tarp. So for us, it's all about rhythm. And so there's two sort of methods that we can use. One is using, like, a summer cover that we overwinter, which then allows us to, you want to get the kind of biomass from the summer cover to have, like, a nice thick covering for the early spring. And then we can go in early spring and no-till something like oats into, like, an overwinter summer cover, and that keeps down the weeds, or, in our barley. So in our grains, we can do that. And then, so one is to allow a summer cover to sort of winter kill. So you have to make sure, everything in your mix is going to winter kill. We're dealing with climate change, so some of the things that used to winter kill won't winter kill, like oats are questionable in our region right now, other things. But you want to make sure whatever you put in your summer mix will winter kill. And then you can go in early spring, and then you don't have to do tillage in your field. The other way is to use, another crop like rye is the big one that farmers are using, but you can also do it with vetch, and you go in and you get your growth, and then you're going to come in and do your roller crimper and then, seed into that. So this year we got a couple of projects that we're doing that depend on both that summer cover winter killing. I have a field ready for some grain to go in, and we'll see how that works out. We've done it in the past pretty successfully. And then the one that we're working with the most is, like, how to get the rye down in a way where it stays down, and we can, like, plan into that and get a summer crop in. So we're looking to. We got an acre of rye in that we want to basically roller crimp and then come back with some beans in that field. We got another one that we're going to try with some squash. So these are the kinds of projects or, experiments that we're doing in no-till and in low-till. The more practical is just, we've gone to precision seeding and precision weeding. So I use, we imported last year a Japanese system called the Q-Ho, which is based on a torsion weeder system, which does in-row weeding. So it's very similar to the finger weeders that we see coming in. And with that system, I can do some grains. I can also do the beans and get pretty good precision weeding in. So, the difference between organic no-till and sort of conventional no-till is that conventional no-till uses tons of glyphosate, and they have the advantage of just wiping out, a whole cropland and starting afresh, whereas with organic no-till, you have to figure out ways to, like, transition into a new crop without turning over the ground. And so, which can be challenging. Even most folks starting in no-till, in the beginning, you have to figure out a way. So one of the challenges that we have as a sort of leasing land and coming in behind sort of some of these farmers is that, some of this land has either not been in production and has just been sort of sitting there. We got a plot that we need to sort of get into this year. That is another 20-acre plot that the county came to us with, and they are having problems with invasive weeds, and so in order to break up those weed cycles, we're going to have to use some serious cover cropping. But in the beginning, we're going to have to flip that ground over to get it started. So when we say no-till, I guess if we started in that field on a smaller scale, we could use the tarps, and the tarps might be successful. But on the scale that we're going in, we're probably going to have to use some implement and flip the ground over. We probably won't use a bottom plow or anything like that, but we're going to, I've been using a yeoman's plow, and then I come back with my new toy for my tractor is I got a 6-foot wide rotary harrow. And so I like the rotary harrow because it doesn't do an inversion on the soil, but it can, allow us to break up enough stuff to break some of the patterns of the weeds and get those populations down. So we're using less, getting away from the spader, which a spader is not the worst tool ever because it's still inverting the soil, but it's not completely destroying the soil structure. But with the rotary harrow, you have less inversion. You sort of keep some of your soil structure there as well. But because you have less inversion, some of those weeds stay on top. But it can allow me to come in there and, put in a nice cover crop or come in with a grain crop. And even, I have 6 acres of winter wheat right now on a farm. That was basically hay for a while, coming in behind hay, where we just kind of broke up that cycle, and we just went for it. We just put the wheat in there, and we're going to get what we get. There is no opportunity to come back and tine weed, or sort of. So then it's like you put in your wheat, and you're hoping for the best there. And so we got a couple situations like that. So we do our best to move towards no-till and low-till and sort of get away from the plastic.
That's cool, man. We always stress not approaching it with dogma. there's especially right on your scale, you got to figure it out, and in your circumstances where you're coming into these other farms.
Right. So and that's been as we work the land. I talk about my buddy Hines, and the beauty of his system is that he has on-farm composting. So the only nutrients he's taking in from the outside are minerals. He's one of these mineral people. So his whole farming is biological farming, and really remineralizing the soil. So that's his focus. So he's not importing any nitrogen from any source outside of his farm. So it's all on-farm composting. I think the only outside input that he has is the local town that he's near brings in leaves, but everything else is, composted from the farm. So he composts all his hay, he composts, all of his vegetable matter, and he creates his on-farm compost. So that said, he still has huge issues with weeds. So he's moving more into, in his grain production, he's using tine weeders, which basically, tine weeders wipe out the small broadleaf weeds, which sort of can compete with grasses in the beginning. Because in the end, when we talk about organic farming and organic grain growing, then you have to look at your, harvesting. And so, there's been years on certain fields where I've gone down to his farm. I've had cleaner fields, thankfully, and And you wonder, like, where are the oats in this field? Like, I see this field of grass, but what did you plant here? What are we trying to harvest? And so he's on a farm that did vetch, as beautiful as it is a crop that you never want to let go to seed, because once you have it, you always have it. And when you have vetch in the middle of your wheat field, it's a nightmare. When you go to harvest it, the stuff wraps around everything. It can outgrow plants, and so going in to harvest the field of wheat that's full of vetch is a nightmare. And yet we do it all the time in organic production, because there is no opportunity to do like a spray down. The big wheat farmers, a month before they go on the harvest, they just go through the field with glyphosate and wipe everything out so that their crop dries down. For us, we can't do any of that. We were hoping this year to experiment with, there was a product out that was based on thyme and eugenol, which we thought was going to be like a beautiful way that we could do some organic no-till. It was, what was it? It was eugenol, and then there was another base, and they pulled it off of the market because they found that it had like 5% glyphosate in it in some samples. So you had big organic farms, but the stuff really worked as a systemic herbicide, and so that was like some hope. And now we've kind of got to hit the reset button and go back to the drawing board on that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to calculate in, when you're doing organic grain production, like how weedy is this field going to get? So you have to have a way, when we think about the tine weeders, we're trying to reduce the competition up front. And with the Japanese system that I have, I can do like, I have a row spacing of about 12 inches in between the grains, but I can do some pretty nice cultivation. And so last year I used, I had an acre of einkorn, and we did mechanical cultivation on that acre of einkorn. And we got pretty good results. And then towards the end, we had a bigger issue with lodging. We had a cleaner field, but in the end it all fell to the ground. And so then that presents a whole nother sort of harvesting issue, And so, we're working out the details on the, how to get nice, clean fields when you're doing organic growing for grain production.
Well, Nazirahk Amen, I look forward to seeing what all you figure out in coming years to continue doing that. It's super cool to hear your story, and I loved that deep dive on rice.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great. All right. If you enjoyed that show, follow Nazirahk at Dr. Farmer Brother on Instagram. You can also check out purpletools.net if you are interested in some of the tools we talked about. Look for his products in the DC area because I know you want to try that rice. We will hook it up with some links in the show notes, as always. Make sure that you are all subscribed up here. Here's your checklist: the No Till Flowers podcast, Growers Live podcast feed, and our new endeavor with Clara Coleman, the Winter Growers podcast, which new episodes are coming out now. There will be a new one on Wednesday. To support our work, make sure to head over to patreon.com/no-till-growers and sign up. Or alternatively, you can go to no-tillgrowers.com and find multiple ways to pitch in, including purchasing my new book, The Living Soil Handbook. It ships in July. Pre-ordering that from us means the proceeds go to making you more content. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must talk about how is it possible that the Strokes Is This It record is almost 20 years old. I mean, as an editorial aside here, the Strokes' last record that came out last year, The New Abnormal, was my 2020 farming jam, and it was great. It's a great record. Anyway, big thanks to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for all of their help, with a special thank you to Clara Coleman this week for helping me with some tunnel questions I had. Huge thanks to Willie Drums Please Fab reading for the theme music. Thanks, as always, to my wife, Hannah, for everything in the world. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
I didn't mean to talk about rice the whole time.
Oh, no. I love, like, when we can get into those kind of details and that, like, on that level I love that. That's the nerdy stuff that I'm always after.